I'm Jessica Ensworth from Angela Estate Winery. I'm joined here with Miss Jess Pierce of Walter Scott and W.T. Vintners, and Glenn Grisham of Locus Wine Consulting, and Miss Shirley Brooks from Elk Cove. And we're just going to have kind of a roundtable discussion. We're just going to talk. So if you have questions, Ann Nisbet, she's right there, and she's going to have a mic. And if you have questions, we're just going to talk it out. So one of the things that we wanted to do with this seminar is we'll definitely get into kind of some great practices for what you can do in distribution. Once you have a distributor, now what? What do you do with it? Because a lot of people, I think, once you get into distribution, they sort of quit. They're like, here you go, you've got all my wines, you sell it, I'll see you later, I'm going to work on my next market. And really, this is kind of when your work needs to start. And so I think that we wanted to kind of get into the meat of that and answer some questions and just some great little practices and things that you can do with incentives and programming and all that good stuff. And one of the things we wanted to talk about...
Can I interrupt you for a minute?
Yes.
I have a question for you all. How many of you are currently selling wine through the distribution channel? Awesome. That's great. How many of you have been doing that for more than 5 years? How many less? Great. That helps us in kind of targeting our conversation because, frankly, the channel has changed. And you've heard some of this from the bigger sessions, how 20 years ago, there were significantly fewer of us selling through the channel in a much larger distribution pool. I think statistic was somewhere previously about 2,000 wineries, and am I getting that right? 2,000 wineries and 9,000, distributors. So, and now it's somewhere under 700 distributors to, triple the wine brands. And so it's so important about how you manage this channel. And it is a lot of work. But hopefully it comes with a lot of rewards too. I mean, we're all in this, not only in our industry in relationship, but you will find lifelong relationship in the FOB channel as well. So I might be getting ahead of the program, but one of my key things about this is, pick wisely where you want to sell your wine. Make sure it's somewhere you want to go. And that might not be those big markets of New York and Texas and California, but where, your sister lives, in Milwaukee. And you have a free place to stay, and you get to see them. And you have a built-in, outlet for your wine through an advocate who's already there. Sometimes this isn't rocket science.
One of the things we wanted to start with was in your home base. So it's really important that you participate in your own success or failure. It's within your control. And once you've landed a distributor, your job's not over, but don't forget about your home market as well. You have to work the market. You cannot sell wine from home. You have to work the market, especially in your backyard. And that means, for me, is being in front of an account once a month, probably at the longest. And so if you can't be in front of an account yourself once a month, then you need to probably look at somebody who can be, or somebody who's out there. And there's a lot of ways to do this where you don't have to employ just one salesperson to work with you. It's expensive, it's hard to manage. What's happening in a trend right now is that you're starting to see more small wineries sharing a salesperson. And that's a collaborative effort. You're starting to see it. Jess is doing it now with a couple of brands. Love and Squalor and Helioterra and Monrovia are sharing a salesperson, and they're working on that together, and they're using Oregon Wine Country distribution for delivery in foregoing a really formal distribution thing or arrangement. If your brand takes up real estate on a wine list or on a shelf, it needs to turn a profit. It needs to produce profit in that vein so that pull-through is happening. So you're getting that pull-through. It's really great to massage the accounts that you already have so they are continually producing for you and not just going out and kind of shotgunning it out to find as many new accounts as possible. Make sure the ones that you have are working for you all the time. And the way that you can really get behind that and do that is demos in your retail accounts and staff trainings in your on-prem. And there's very few times if I place an on-premise account, especially by the glass, that I'm not in there going, great, part of my sales pitch is when can I come in and do the staff training and be in front of your team? And I've just employed 5 to 25 now new ambassadors for my brand that are out selling, because you have to remember a server is like a revolver. They have 6 shots. They take 6 things. We have so much crap when we sit down at a table, right? There's a new menu, there's the cocktail list, there's the wine list, we're going to talk about specials, and there's a board. There's all of this literature and this crap that we set down on a table. So the server's time with the guest to sell wine has gotten incrementally smaller. And so what ends up happening, even if you have a really big wine list, is that the buyer knows everything about those brands, but the servers don't. And so they'll find an Oakry Buttery Chardonnay, and they find a big fat cab that they can rely on. They have something sweet for the sweet kids that want to come in, and then they have maybe 3 wines that they know a story. You want to be one of those 6 shots. And the way that you can do that is being in the staff training 15 minutes on a Friday at lineup and just give them that quick 10-second pitch. And it is incredible how exponential your sales can be and how much your account supports it and appreciates it. And that's the goal all the way through, is that you, the account, the distributor, are trying to sell more of your product every day. Do you guys want to touch base on some of that stuff?
That's really, really important to remember. This is all about sales. It is not about anything else. Anything else is really, truly extraneous in many respects. Oops. Oh, there we go. Is that better? Sorry. Thank you. Being organized for the sales process is incredibly important, and there's a lot of touchstones that come with managing a distributor. There we go. Okay. And I think, going back to the last seminar, I know some of you were there, the notion of having your voice clarified, your sense of mission and purpose clarified, having that organized in the materials is really important. Also having all your programs organized to follow through on that and implement that is hugely important. That sense of organization is very, it's imperative you bring that to the process of how you manage a distributor. Most distributors, particularly at the management level of a brand manager or a general sales manager, they are thinking usually anywhere from 6 to 9 months in advance. If you've got something you want to get done, you need to reverse engineer your time frame backwards from there if you want to be in the queue for getting attention and getting something done. If you are talking to someone at the local sales manager level, they're working 3 to 6 months in advance. So again, work backwards. If you've got a work with coming up, you need to be talking to that person on the street who's actually helping you get that arranged and who you're being assigned to and what you want to get done. That conversation should be happening 3 to 6 months in advance. They may think it's too early, but given their time and attention span, you got to start now, not later. For them, and I think to some degree what you do in managing a distributor is very much an exercise in triage and of competing priorities. Given if you put yourself in the shoes of the distributor, most of the time, they've got anywhere from probably a dozen to 2 dozen sales representatives who are calling them with questions, concerns, favors, allocations. They then in turn serve probably 1,000 different accounts that they in turn get questions and calls and orders to place from. And then in turn, there are probably at least 100 to 200 suppliers in the portfolio who are calling about their next work with and their next programming and what needs to get done. So in order to get your way through the noise of just getting things done, you've got to be really organized, you've got to be on point, you need to have what your conversational plan is, what your email plan is, your communication plan, that needs to be thought out in advance. You don't call to say, I want to figure this out. You should be calling to say, I think I have a solution, here's what I see, what do you see? And let's figure it out. So it's imperative that you do your homework to get the outcome you want. If you aren't taking the time to do your basic homework, research, knowing your pricing niche, knowing your competitors, knowing which SKUs are slow, which SKUs are fast, I hate that word SKUs, but which wines are selling quickly or not, and where, and how many samples have been used, who used those samples. In the last seminar, there was a question about how do I address my distributor who only seems to sell on scores? And my response was, you need to understand what they're doing to sell the wine regardless of scores. So the notion of sampling is hugely important, and how they have addressed your brand in sales meetings, in team meetings, on ride-withs. Is there somebody who's your brand ambassador who's getting out there and talking for you, who's assigned that role as a brand manager in the organization? So that's a lot to think about, but it's important to be thinking that through in advance. Can't overemphasize that enough.
So we've all been mentioning being really organized when you're going into a visit, which is so important. But think of it as well that the more tools you have in your bag, the more experiences you're going to be prepared for. And that's one of the things I try to do when I go into a visit is as much research as possible, but really have too much stuff with you and choose wisely when you use those things, because different mediums are going to work well for different people. You know, usually when I'm on a market visit, I'll have things from a box of rocks and dirt to like very formal lists of tasting notes, and you know, all of these things are going to come in handy at some point, but don't try to use them all at once either, because you will overwhelm everyone, including yourself. So really try to make that connection, begin that relationship, and find your path to each individual person that you're going to talk to. I think that's really important.
Yeah, I think it's hugely important. I mentioned that earlier in the previous seminar, having that toolbox of things that you can bring to the process. And those tools will work for everyone. They will work from the sales manager to the owner to the rep to the account. There's no gamemanship that should be happening in this process. It should be your own natural story, features, attributes, passions, etc. And you use those as you need them, but have them ready at all times for every customer.
Yeah.
I'm going to kind of back away from the actual market visit experience to go back to kind of managing the overall plan. And I feel like that starts, for me and with my team, I'm lucky to have a team of great sales managers that help me sell Elk Cove across the country. And one of the things that is vital that we do as a team early in the year in January is set goals. We do this by market, and that includes sales goals, what we want to sell dollar-wise and volume-wise in that market. And part of that conversation also is around how we think we're going to accomplish that. You know, compare it to, you know, historical numbers and plans for going to that market once, twice, 4 times, you know, if it's Washington, close by. And then using the various tools that these guys are talking about when we're in the market, whether it be general sales meetings, you know, ride-withs. I'm going to borrow a phrase from a colleague because I think it's great, the happy hour experience. After your day of working with someone, not just that person, but often you know, you spend some dollars, open all your wines, and have the entire team join you for, you know, 2 hours happy hour. That you're not only gonna, you know, have them, all of them, taste your wines, but also engage with you in an environment that's less structured. And suddenly now you've hit, you know, 6 reps on one day of a ride with. You know, these are golden opportunities if you can create them. So think outside the box. Yeah.
Not at all.
Thank you. I'm a very small producer, and I've just gotten into distribution. I appreciate the goal-setting thing, but literally, if you haven't ever done it in that market before, should you make something up, kind of, or? I mean, how do you approach that? Do you just kind of see what happens in the
Sure,
first year
no,
and then?
Again, I always go back to you probably sounding like the broken record, but you've got to know your numbers, you've got to know your price points, you need to know your peer group, you need to do some homework, you need to know your target audience. Certainly for me, when I'm setting goals with distributors, I'm also looking for a dialogue with them. I may come in with a very honest, straight goal of what I need to get done. In some circumstances, it may be aspirational. It will vary according to the market and the history in the market and what you need to get done. But to answer your question specifically, certainly if you haven't done it before, certainly start with knowing what your target audience is, how many of those kinds of customers are in that marketplace, and come up with a rational formula for somebody who's brand new. You're not going to sell to all those customers in 1 year. You may not be able to sell to half of them in that year. You need to think about how many reps there are, what you're willing to do in terms of times and samples. But go through a process of penciling it out, the proverbial back of the napkin process, and then speak to your distributor and let them know this is how I got to this number. And so you start to talk about your expectations for them in terms of the capacities of the market, and you indicate to them you've done some homework, you understand their challenges and opportunities. But to fly in from 10,000 feet without having done that will not get buy-in from your distributor.
And I think you got to even back it up from there. I think you need to look into your winery and say, do I need to go outside of Oregon? That's the first question. Do I produce enough wine to actually sell it outside of Oregon? If you're selling 80% of your wines DTC, leave. You're doing it great. Get out of here. Right? You're in the magic zone. You're making the most profit you can make. Your DTC is your most profitable vein of your business, and your distribution is the least profitable vein of your business. So, in my opinion, I try and look at DTC first. How much of my production can I do in DTC, and where can I increase that? And then I do the support in my own market. So I do demos and staff trainings. I do luncheons. I get people to my vineyard, and I do events. I pair up with my pals. I get creative, and I try and make my home market my strongest market. Start there. And then the next part of that is like, okay, great. So I've eaten up this much in DTC. Awesome. I've got this much in my local market. Badass. Now, where's the low-hanging fruit? Where is it easy for me to get to, cheap, and where I can stay, and where I want to go? Everybody wants to go to New York. Everybody wants to go to New York. You know how long it takes to get from Portland to New York? All day. It's expensive. The average market visit for me is $2,500, except in New York and San Francisco, and it cost me $5,000 every single time. Because the hotels are $400 a night, the flights are $700. I got to take out a sales team, and that's easily $1,500 every time I go. Can I afford to do that? And so you want to look at where, if I go to Seattle, and that's an easy state, I can drive, I can take my own car, I can make my own schedule, I can go more often, I can stay for free because I got pals. I'm going to go there. Right? And they're friendly to our cause. So look at what's the low-hanging fruit around you. Colorado, great state for us. Amazing. Arizona, $200 flight. Easy. Nevada is really tough to get into because everybody sells through casinos and there's no retail. So just knowing a couple of those markets that are accessible to you, do you actually even need to go outside of Oregon? I've had the pleasure in my career of having David Adelsheim and Eugenia Keegan be mentors for me, probably far more often than they're comfortable with. But David had a really great piece of advice to small wineries starting out that I would like him to address, if you don't mind, David. Please and thank you.
So I think the piece of advice you're saying is the one that I was reminded of. A year and a half ago, we had just changed distributors in Texas, going from one of the big 2 distributors to a rather small distributor. And I was sitting out in the parking lot with one of the partners of this company, and we were having some sort of a theoretical conversation, and she reminded me about the golden rule of wineries and distributors. And that is, If you're a small winery, you should work with a small distributor. And if you're a large winery, a large, et cetera. And that's a law that we frequently abuse and ignore, much to our own detriment. And this is not because people who work for big distributors, or small for that matter, are bad people. There are great people working everywhere in the wine world because they all love wine. How can they be that bad? But their priorities, if they are in a big distribution company and you are a small distributor, cannot be you. A big distribution company has a lot of brands and a lot of SKUs and a lot of things to do, and it's extremely difficult for them to pay attention to a small winery. And the opposite is true too. If you're a largest winery, a small company doesn't have enough salespeople to sell your wine. That mistake is made less often. There are big distributors that have fine wine divisions, and every now and then those fine wine divisions actually work. But most of the time, it's still a big distributor, even if it's got a fine wine division. Is that what you wanted?
That's exactly what I wanted.
Good.
Thanks, David.
Can I?
So, yeah, please go
I
ahead.
just want to add on. So I don't disagree, but I veer a little bit off of the, sell a lot of your wine in your home market. I'm proud to say that Oregon is our strongest market. But the reason why I say, I might veer away from that strategy a little bit is this is also the most challenging market to sell Oregon wine in. It's the most competitive market because everybody's doing it. So you're fighting theoretically against every single other Oregon brand. Going outside of this market is a smaller pool. And desirable, but there is cost associated with that. So it's one of those factors that you need to kind of pencil in. And, we kind of use a rule of, 10%. 10% of sales in a market is kind of roughly what you should think you will spend to support that market in terms of travels and expenses in that manner. So perhaps that addresses the lady's question a little bit about starting from zero and where do I go. And to back up what Glenn was saying, the goal setting process is also a door to opening conversation. You may have a goal that they're like, we can't do that, but then you have somewhere to go. But if you don't ever have that conversation or set goal and talk about what your expectations are, then you're certainly going nowhere because you may be operating off of one framework that you're just assuming that they're going to do X, Y, and Z for you. But it's never been communicated. Communication is huge and part of your relationship with your distributors. And we haven't talked about that timely yet, but I think it's important that you do regular communication with your distribution network. And we were chatting that kind of a quarterly time frame is sort of the minimum, but equally, when you're in that communication, it needs to be useful information, you need to be communicating whether it is that, you look to be on target of reaching your goals or you're surpassing your goals. Should we discuss maybe there is more growth going on? You need to have strategies.
And I think just to back up a point you made earlier about the constant communication, it's so important, but also know that everyone's time is very valuable. And when you are communicating, make sure you have some content in your communication, something to give to them, something to be of value to share with their team. You always want to be having that communication be something that's not just checking in and saying hi. It's got to be way deeper than that.
Yes, they do not have time for hi at all. That's not in the vocabulary. So a couple of quick footnotes. With regards to DTC, I would disagree a little bit again with you on that notion. I know too many brands in California that have gone the complete DTC route that are no longer relevant. Nobody talks about them. They're not reviewed. The SOM community doesn't tweet about them, and they're just out of circulation, frankly. So I think at a minimum, you want to have 10%, 15% or so that acts as a billboard and advertising for you in the broader national picture, because it will help drive people when they visit. It'll drive people to check your website out. So I think putting all your eggs in proverbially one basket is not usually a great idea. Another footnote with regards to communication, I want to follow up on your comments. I think quarterly is a minimum, monthly is even better. There's a lot of different ways you can find things that are important and valuable to the distribution and trade and SOM community. Some of it's about the new release that's coming up in 30 days and are you ready? Or allocations, but make it actionable. It has to be something that is of meaning to the decisions that the people who are your partners are going to make. It may be that it's an interview in Saveur magazine that'll help them sell the wine, but it is not the Pinot pickup party and pizza thing that's happening. So don't just put them on your mailing list for the sake of being on the mailing list. They will start to ignore your emails. And you want them to pay attention when you do email.
Yes, Miss Ellen.
Yeah, I would like to back up a little bit because I had a question at the end of the last session, and I think it's probably relevant for most of the people in the room that we struggle with. We talked a little bit about pricing your wine correctly, which is very important. One of my questions is a little more technical, and I'd love to get advice on this. Do you price it differently for different markets? Do you pick your end game of wanting to land on a shelf at $50, so therefore different lading costs, different distances, different tax structures? Do you adjust FOBs, or do you have a flat FOB for everyone?
Do you want to start? Because I think we probably have different answers. Because I think the scale of your project will impact that. How much volume you have for those particular price points will impact that strategy. So there's a lot of different considerations. So
Well, from our point of view, we're pretty consistent on our FOB pricing. We tend to view that as, the not the break-even point, but that's the desired target pricing we want to hit. This opens the door to, I was wondering, how many of you are familiar with, the, terminology in the FOB world, SPAs, DAs, which, then of course free goods, which are, yes, so SPA is a special purchasing allowance, and it is a type of discount, as opposed to a DA, which is a depletion allowance. And they work quite differently. An SPA would, for example, be, $12 off a case for pallet buys. If they place an order for a full pallet of a specific wine, then they'll get $12 right off the top on purchasing that wine. As opposed to a DA or a depletion allowance can also be $12 off a case, but that is applied kind of on the backside through depletions. They have to send, there's reporting, there's paperwork, but they don't get that price benefit until later. And the advantage to that is that you have a little more control over where it's applied.
Sure. So your DAs are usually very specific and targeted. You're rewarding on-premise placements by the glass, very specific kinds of distribution that fits with your business plan, and you want to incentivize that process. Usually the SBAs are done in advance because you have a volume issue, generally speaking, that you're trying to work through or seed a market in some capacity. I also think it's very important when you think through the pricing model that you do that research about, okay, I want to be by the glass, what actually is the by the glass price on average or in specific markets that you want to work with. I had this conversation in California recently, not an Oregon brand, but they were at $20.50 by the glass, and they thought that would get them close because they knew other people had $20 prices. The reality is they needed to be at 17 or 18 to be something new that somebody would try that they hadn't heard of before. So knowing the elasticity of the price range is hugely important, and what may work in Los Angeles and New York is not the same as what's going to work in Denver or St. Louis. So it's important to think that through and look at it market by market, because actually you may not have to spend what you think you have to spend to accomplish your outcomes.
And just quickly to add on to that as well, if when you're doing things like that, trying, to generate more business, you should always ask your distributor to participate in the process. It's something that, because what you're doing is helping them sell more wine and make more money too. So it never hurts to ask. If you're having to give a little, ask them to give a little.
Actually, I would say, don't ask. Go in knowing what you want from them, knowing that this is what I can give and this is what I want you to give. Will that work for you? This is what I think is reasonable. Don't let them tell you what they think is reasonable. That may not be reasonable at all to you.
Can you give us, work through this with real numbers, like a $20 bottle of wine, and what these numbers translate when you're talking to them?
Sure. Okay, so the basic rule of thumb for these, for SBAs and DAs, is that you will participate in 2/3 of that amount. And they, in terms of the price reduction, the discount, that dollar amount, you, as a producer, you are generally expected to pay 2/3 of that, and they will, in a sense, forego 1/3 of that in revenue. Yeah. Right.
So let's say you have a $20 retail bottle of wine that you're trying to sell to your distributor. So your normal expected FOB on that would be $10.
Correct.
But you want to get a glass pour on this.
Well, again, you actually may be priced right in some markets because you're likely to be $13, $14 wholesale. And in some markets, that's the perfect price point for by the glass. A lot depends on what the wine is, the circumstances, et cetera.
I can give you an example. We have a by the glass Pinot Noir that we FOB for $120 a case, and then usually that's $15.33 wholesale. And if we want to pour it by the glass, the kind of magic number for that is $14 a bottle. So we do a DA on the difference, or we work it out with them. The super sweet spot for Oregon Pinot Noir, if it's not from your estate or something, is actually 12, but that's really hard to do. So we go for $14 by the glass for like an everyday, not a super fancy high-end glass pour, but just regular Willamette Valley Pinot Noir. Does that help?
Basically, with a DA, you're going to write a check. Okay? With a DA, you're going to write a check. So if you're prepared to write a check, then you know how much you're going to have to budget for that. What happens with a DA where you have to be careful, and this is why you have to know your numbers. You need to know your cost of goods. You need to know what your healthy margin is, what you're going to charge for FOB, freight on board. That's your bare bottom minimum, right? And then there's a wholesale on top of that and retail. So usually your FOB is half of retail. You take your FOB price times 1.5, and that usually gives you 33% margin. They'll take that number times 1.5, and that gives you another 33% margin at retail. That's very basic, bare bones math. So if you are going to do a DA, you're going to write a check. If you're going to do an SBA, you're going to discount the invoice. In either situation, that wine can be sold anywhere they want to sell it. So you have no control. You can say, I really only want this by the glass. Good luck. Right? That's one way to do it. The other way that you could do it would be to take some of your bottles and put a sticker over the UPC and you create a new SKU, like a special select. And you can say, this price, this bottle, because you're dealing with different markets, this particular bottle with a sticker over the SKU is going to be for by the glass only, and I'm going to sell it to you. Usually it's 180 FOB. I'm going to sell it to you for 120. And you've got to tell me where you place it. And that's another effective way to do it. On the other end, you can also, we were talking about this earlier, you can say, hey, I'm going to sell this to you at 120 a case, but I'd like you to sell it to the account for 125. And I'd like you to create a $5 bank. And you keep that bank. And so for all these cases that get sold in that distributor, and I wouldn't do it in every state, but certain states where you're going to need the help, now you've created a $5 bank on every single case, and it's all variable to what you want. And then you can apply that towards a discount for an account. You can put it towards an incentive for sales reps. You can put it towards a trip. So that might be another way to do it. You can absolutely participate in your own success or failure. To go back to your question, Ellen, the other thing is my FOB price is my price. It's my price because we have too many markets to manage. But you're always going to add the tax and freight depending on those states. It's called B&O tax and freight, and it's basically like $5 a case. And then plus whatever each state's tax is going to be. And that'll give you where that wine's going to come in on the shelf. But everybody else's wine is going to come in on the shelf at under that same sort of guise. So do you need to dumb that price down in that particular market? Like Pennsylvania, the wines here at $45 are going to be $60 in Pennsylvania. They just are, because you add, I think, 15% tax on that state. So you need to know your numbers, but really your FOB price is the main thing. How low can you go? And still have a healthy margin where you're still making money on your wine to sell at that price. And then talk to your distributor and ask them, hey, how much of this can you sell? What do you need? What incentivizes your team? How often can I come visit you? And are you going to send me a depletion report, and where and how often? And you should be getting, if you can get a depletion report every month, that's ideal. If you can get it every quarter.
Yes, well done.
It's, what's that?
Well done if you do that.
If you can get it done, it's amazing. It's really hard, but you really need to ask for those things. Certain distribution networks will give you, the supplier, access to their network. You can go in and look around and dig around. It's a pain in the ass because you have to learn how their systems work, but you can go in, that some of those will give you that access, so you don't have to ask anybody for a report anymore. So there's a lot of things that you can actually do and participate in that will actually help you get the data that you need. But before you do any of this, you've got to know who your target audience is and where they are before you go into those markets. Is that helpful?
And I think it's super important, this idea of a bank. I've used that in a number of different circumstances, but having a bank that either the distributor manages or, frankly, you manage, and you built it into your pricing equations, you know that you're going to have X amount of wiggle room in your pricing because you know that you need to be at $19.99 or $34.99. There's all sorts of different key price points, or $18 by the glass, $14 by the glass. But make sure that you've built in that wiggle room in terms of financial support, because it isn't going to come from anywhere else other than the price of your wine and the profit on your wine. So you've got to build that into your pricing strategy from day one. It is very hard to go from net to a discounting pricing strategy. If you know that there are strategic price points you need to meet, plan for them in your financial equations. Think of yourself as creating a bank for that process, either internally at the winery or at the distributor. Because it will save you a lot of heartache and frustration later.
Obviously, these prices will have wiggle room, depending on the market, but also something to keep in mind is just the age that we're in right now, our online wine sales. I feel like that's fair to mention right now, is that you can put your wine into a market and it would be sold possibly by a retailer that also sells online and for a lower price margin. And if your direct-to-consumer sees your wines online for a much lower price, that's not going to go over very well. I think that could have an impact on your DTC, which is obviously where a lot of your money is coming from. Why would they buy from you if they can order it online and have it delivered to their house with no shipping for half the price? So that's something that, it's hard to manage. You can't know every place your wine is going, but the relationships with these distributors that you have to be important. You have to communicate that message to them that maybe that's not your goal. It could be if you are trying to move a bunch of wine, or if something's an older vintage that you're trying to get rid of, but just be very aware of where your wines are going if you can, because that's an important part of how your message is perceived throughout the entire nation if you are going on a national sales plan.
I just want to chime in a little bit here. Wine Searcher, I mentioned in the prior seminar, it's important if you are at 20% or more DTC, you should be checking it just to know what's going on in the marketplace. In general, you should be within 10% across the country. That's my rule of thumb before there's a problem. If you get outside that box and that range, then somebody's going to pick up a phone and call you, whether it's your DTC consumer or your distributor in South Carolina. And these days, I've had plenty of distributor conversations where they say, while I'm talking to them, they are looking up the brand I am talking about online to see what is happening on Wine Searcher before I get past 30 or 40 words. So make sure you've got your proverbial pricing ducks in a row.
I'm going to kind of switch gears a little bit. Go ahead.
Real quick. So obviously there's a wide range of distributors out there. And as you onboard your brand, you're going to have a lot of ambassadors. How do you manage those ambassadors? How do you manage those distributors? Are there systems that you put into place? Are there software programs that you prefer? How do you manage the chaos?
Great question, and it's actually kind of where I was going to segue into, because obviously, pricing is a critical element to your whole strategy in selling wine through the FOB channel. But we're talking about, managing here, and that's just one element. And I do feel, so we talked about, I started with the, kind of goal setting early in the year, and then we talked about these minimum quarterly check-ins. I think another, important element to this is inventory. Keeping your eye on inventory in these various markets that you've had. So, for example, you've determined you're going to do 2 trips to I'm going to use my home state of Michigan, which is one of those markets off the radar and is one of our strongest markets. Who goes there? I do, because I have family there. So I've planned 2 trips there, every year for the last 12 years. Guess what? That's become a strong market for us because consistency, regular visits. And why is that? Because I built relationships, not only with the buyers, but to me, more importantly, within that distribution channel. These are your ambassadors, and they become, personal friends and regular points of contact and ambassadors for Elk Cove. I think that's related to when you go on a ride with, how do you prepare for that? The first thing is, as Glenn had mentioned earlier, this is the inventory point is critical. If you're going into a market and you didn't check inventory that they even have your wines in stock, guess what? You're not selling very much because it's not there. So, you need to be looking ahead to where you're going and making sure that what you want to sell, and maybe it's a new release, or maybe it's your core wines, whatever it is, they physically have that wine in stock and are prepared to sell on those orders that you're going to be taking on your day of a ride with. And so for me, a ride with, say you're fortunate enough to call on 8 to 10 different accounts, on-premise, off-premise, whatever. One of my most important goals for that day, frankly, isn't necessarily making an placement at every single one of those accounts. That's awesome if that happens. But my goal is to get to know that sales rep. You have a captured person for, essentially 6 to 8 hours that day in a car that you're riding with. Why are they in this business? Who are they? sometimes your conversations won't at all be about wine. And suddenly, not only have they bonded with you, they're interested in what you're saying about the wines, they now are mimicking what you're saying. And guess what? When you go home, that person is going to continue doing that multiple times. So the ride with is critical, and the relationship you make with that person is, to me, more important than, getting one single placement. Those things are great and vital, obviously, but the relationship you're building is very important.
I think that you should treat your distributor as your partner. And I think that there's going to be a chain of command in each distributor. Bigger distributors, you probably need to reach out to the regional managers and the DMs first before you reach out to reps. Some distributors are like, yeah, call our reps, we don't care. But that's going to depend on your independent and individual relationship. But you really want to try and follow a chain of command if you can. And that's a really good, it's polite. It's just polite. And sometimes you can get some of your information sent down into those food chains, because then once you're doing your market work, you're mobilizing an army of people, because each sales rep has about 80 accounts. So you might see 6 or 8 of them, you might see 10% when you're on a market work, but if you blow that, well, you just discourage somebody who's got 80 accounts who might have half of them place your wines. Or you could be a rock star and be super easy and really flexible and fun, and be prepared and bring wine and know what they have in the market and what they're selling it for and what vintage they're in. And if they're behind a vintage, what are we going to do to close the gap here and get a new order in, a new PO? That's the goal, right? Get a new PO by the end of before you get there. And how are you going to help them sell that back vintage? And that's all part of your planning. I never go to a market without wine, ever, or tools, or POS, or wine keys, because what ends up happening is the warehouse messes it up, they can't pick up their sample, the bottle is corked, they only got one, and then if I have this extra wine, well, great. If I see an on-premise account, we sold them, you know what, let me give you this bottle of wine and you go ahead and just do a staff training, here's the literature, let's get you going, and how about we get that shipped in on Tuesday? Close those deals, ask for the sale, and sometimes have an extra wine is there. And if not, at the end of your week, give it to your rep. Hey, take this out. You know our story. Go into the market. Go forward, young men and women, and sell our wines, because that's what we're all preaching the Oregon gospel on here. All the road warriors, right? We're on the road, like out there, kind of Bible thumping the Oregon story, and it's great. It's a great story, but I think you have to be prepared to treat your distributor as your partner. Talk to them about what their goals are. The growth every year is like 5 or 10%. So if you can hit your goal of like 100 cases that year and they do well and you reach it, mark it up 5 or 10% over what they did, right? Go from there. If they can't hit it, okay, go back to what they sold, mark that up 5 or 10%, and try again and see what the threshold is and where is there a disconnect, or is this the right market for you? And then you need to really analyze, can I afford to go there? How many cases do I have to sell to pay for this visit? If I'm going to do an incentive, how many cases do I have to sell to pay for this incentive? Am I ready to write that check? Paying to play gets real tricky. If you pay to play, boy, you got to really watch it. And once you can sell wine in 3 ways. You sell it on price, and once you dump your price, you can't come back. It's really hard. You can sell it on scores, and scores are fleeting, and you hope you get them, and when you get them, they're great, but when you don't get them, your ship is not sunk unless you put everything into the score boat. Or you can build it on relationships, and relationships take the longest to build and the longest to break. And so that's where to be that partner. But find out, like Meg, for your question, I'd find out what the protocol is at that each distributor. It's a good question. How do you like for me to communicate? How frequently? And then every time I have press, I send it to my distributors. Anytime I got a new score, hey guys, just want to let you know we got this going on, or we're going to be in your market and I can't wait to see you. Send them a note. Send them a thank you note. You do that work. I do a market recap at every single market I do, and it's like a spreadsheet. So I go, here's the accounts that I saw, here's the sales rep, here's what I showed for the week, here's what I sold by bottle by the glass, by the bottle, by the placement, here's a display, here's what we talked about, and do I need an extra sample bottle? I just build an Excel spreadsheet. And then I take that and it calculates how many cases I sold while I was there, how many accounts that I saw, what my average was, how many sample bottles I need, and what do I need to follow up on. And I send that as a PDF to the sales manager and say, hey guys, let me know when all this ships. And then I look for it on the depletion report, and I check it against the depletion report for 2 months. And if it's not on there, hey, Rock Hill committed to eight bottles of this wine. Why isn't it shipping? And then you've got an answer. You've got a direction. Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
So I intuitively know that building the relationship with the rep that you're doing the ride-alongs with is one of the strongest ways to build a brand ambassador. When starting to build a new relationship with a distributor or rebuilding a relationship with a distributor, and you're setting up these meetings and these ride-alongs, how do you ask for tenured reps, or do you just take whoever they set you up with?
Yeah. Number 2.
Well, you can ask for them, but have a reason why. It isn't just because that's what I want and that's what's going to give me the best bang for the buck. You need to have a reason that makes sense to the distributor. My brand works in these kinds of accounts. Which rep has those accounts? My price point is only going to work in this part of town and not that part of town, so I want to be in that part of town. Who's the rep? So make sure you give the connection to the dots of your motivation and how it's going to help the distributor get the job done.
Yeah, I would add on to that too. I mean, if you've had the misfortune to have a ride with that was not the best use of your time because the wines your wines don't match their route, right? They're selling to. I've already given away the fact that I'm originally from the Midwest, and Michigan is known for party stores, and I pretty comfortably say that virtually everybody's wines don't fit that model from this room. So, if you're going, I mean, it's a huge waste of your time, And, this is part of the follow-up that I neglected to add on that last piece about doing a work with, and, you did your recap. But easily the thing post a bad call like that, and we've all had them, and is to do a follow-up to your brand manager and say, this was, politely, really bad use of my time. It didn't help that rep at all, didn't help you. And how this mismatch happened, I don't know, because obviously your brand manager is the one you should be in partner with in setting up your, your visits. And, I think the requesting a certain salesperson is not necessarily a bad thing. Everyone wants to make sure that their time is best used. So and sometimes, it's also not to be with the same person all the time because they make territory changes, and so that's also something to know. And you're like, well, I've always worked with X, Y, and Z person, but they put me with this person. Well, they've made some changes, and frankly, that can be quite good because you may then see accounts that you weren't, shown before. I've been on ride lists, year after year where I've kind of go to the same accounts with that one rep every time. And after, like the 3rd or 4th year, I'm like, this isn't a good use of my time. Not that you don't want to go and be thankful to those accounts that are supporting you. That's incredibly important. But you're also there to build new business. And so you need to have a healthy mix of both.
I wanted. Oh, you can go ahead.
What's the industry standard for samples for distributors? 'Cause we launched last year and we did a 2-on-20 6-pack sort of special for them to get samples out in the marketplace. And now we're getting pressured to either do that again or cut that in half, but trying to figure out what the norm is and what they should expect. It's a relatively high price point wine, so we're not talking about
In last seminar, we talked about 2 to 5% being kind of the normative amount between an ongoing, steady selling pace of an established wine versus 5% for something new. I certainly can understand the temptation, and it makes a lot of sense to me to provide free goods. I would do that only when you have a very clear understanding of how they're going to be used. You've got a great, strong relationship with clear expectations. Then free goods, you can be more confident they're going to be used the way you want them to. But they can be in a black hole that disappears. So I think that I personally like, and I suspect I'm not alone, in getting a sample report, a depletion bill back for samples, so I know exactly when and where and what was used. At least it gives me a paper trail to have a conversation. When somebody says, like in the last seminar, they only sell on scores, let's talk about samples. Well, who pulled a sample? Are those the right reps? Is it the right territory? Was it the right wine? And I want to back up a bit here to the very, very beginning. I think it's so important. A lot of these questions really follow through from that notion of setting clear objectives about who you are, what you want to accomplish, having a strategy. A lot of these will be answered by having that clear and understood and heard by your partner in the market. Some of these, if they come up, is because we haven't done a good job of setting that and communicating that and staying on it and following up. Follow-up is one of those huge things. There, again, in the minds of the distributor with several hundred suppliers, you come to the market once, you send an email in advance, one afterwards, and then they don't hear from you for a year until it's goal-setting time. Probably not much is going to happen. Whereas if you are constantly chipping away at the share of mind in their head about how they're doing, what they're doing, and what's important to them, and you're giving them tools, and you can have that conversation in a few months. I gave you that special buy the glass price. I gave you that extra couple dollars, and we thought we were going to get another 20 accounts that was going to sell another 60 cases. How did we do? Are we making progress towards that? You've got to be very, very specific and follow up very precisely with them and not get distracted.
I wanted to just jump in real quick. So we had mentioned a little bit about recaps and follow-up for your ride with. And I think I like calling it a work with better than a ride with, because yeah, you're riding along, but you need to be working the whole time that you were there. You're not going to remember the name of the first person you saw by the end of the day. You're not going to remember the name of half of the accounts. You need to be writing everything down in the moment, writing down the names of everybody you meet, keeping all of your business cards that you get organized with the accounts that you saw. We all have smartphones now. You can download Google Docs and a Google Sheet to work, with a spreadsheet that'll be on your computer and make it really easy, because if you are literally writing, then you're gonna have to type it all again. Use your smartphones, use these tools that you have to take notes of everything that happens. And when I'm doing these visits, I'm not just writing their names down, I'm writing down what we talked about. What was the connection that I had with the buyer? What was the connection that I had with someone else I ran into in the store? Try to just make sure and document everything that happened in that experience, so that when I do write them a thank you letter, and I write everyone a handwritten thank you letter, everyone that I visit, everyone that I see, every rep, every person gets a handwritten thank you letter. And I write something about the experience that we had together, and I turn it back to the wines that they tasted, and I thank them. And saying thank you is so important. You have to say thank you throughout this whole time, to your distributor, to the rep you're riding along with, to the person whose time they took out of their day to taste with you. So make sure you're not just recapping, you are collectively putting all of this stuff down in the moment. I mean, you're wasting your time if you're not doing that. This is not a ride along, this is a work with.
Yeah, it's super important to, when you write those follow-up notes, to do personalize them, add something in about the conversation, develop your own shorthand for the back of the card when you're writing pluses, minuses, A's, B's, whatever it is, so that you can quickly, unobtrusively do that. And then add something, save a little ammunition. We talked about all those tools that you have to talk about your brand. Save something that you may not have used for that follow-up note. Here's a map that I didn't have with me. Here's a story. I don't know if you knew this about the winemaker, or whatever it is, but make that message back to them count. Make it something valuable. Sorry.
I do that too. Hang on just one sec. I just want to just touch on it. But one of the things is I get real creative. If I have somebody who's got I talk to their sales reps about their kids. I send them kid stuff. They have dogs. I send them dog stuff. If they have, we talked about the Moody Blues. I send them a CD. You know, we talked about coffee. I send them some coffee. Like you just have to follow through with the things that you talked about, and then get creative. And one of the things about that, like, we pair up to do stuff all the time, because we're friends and we love to be together, and sometimes our jobs get in the way of that. So we've tried to like kind of create some opportunities for us to do things together, and there's a group of us. So like even being in a market, we have a sales group that are like sales guys, you know, all on the road dogs, and we call it the Tom Club, because there's Thomas Hausman from Anime, and Tom Champagne from Montanore, and Tom Sickta from Chehalem, and then all the rest of us girls, and we sync up our calendars on TripIt. There's a little app called TripIt, and so if we're in the same city at the same time, we pair up with our buddies. Sometimes we share hotel rooms. Sometimes we go to dinner together, or we go hit more accounts together, because we want to be in the market, and that's something you can do. If you're in the Portland market, ride along with your friends, and gives you more credibility in the accounts, and have some more fun with it. Take people out to lunch as a team and split the bill. It's really fun to do it that way and kind of follow along. And there's a story that David Alsheim told me that when I really started early in my career, that kind of hammers this home that I want to share with you. Back when, this is from David, he said, back when there were 10 wineries in Oregon in the late 70s and early 80s, David Lett, Dick Ponzi, and I tried to figure out how we could make our wines to a place like New York and get any attention. It was really tough to even get our heads around that, but we eventually realized that we could go to New York together and show our wines. There was a better chance of attracting the wine press and the wine trade, and it would be more effective than any one of us going it alone. And they did this trip about 3 times. And basically what they were doing is they were telling a consistent, common story. They were telling the Oregon story. And then later on, in retrospect, they called this tour 2 Daves and a Dick, which is hilarious to me. I mean, it takes like the stuffing out of selling wine should be fun. It's a lifestyle. It's fun and it's exciting, and we get to eat and drink for a living, and we have this great Oregon lifestyle, and that's what people buy. What's that? Yes, you can later. Yeah, yes. Is there's a question? Yeah, Anne. I'm sorry.
That's okay. So you guys are all rock stars and are so good at your jobs, but not all of us have large enough budgets to have a sales and marketing person, and there's a lot of us in this room that are independent owners, winemakers, national salespeople, and wear all the hats. And a lot of us do everything that we can to support those markets. But I would love to hear your thoughts on the top 5 most biggest priorities of how to support those markets, because I find in managing my distribution partners, there's the list of things that you guys are talking about that I always want to do, and really only about 1 or 2 of them happen. Okay. And what would you suggest is the top things, like absolutely don't ever forget to do this, or the take-homes that in a limited time or budget scenario, what can help us get the biggest bang for our buck of both the time and money?
Are you traveling to the market or not traveling to the market?
Both.
Okay.
And actually, this segues into something I wanted to chat a little bit about. And the notion of, again, making sure your voice is heard and who you are and what you're all about really does impact those kinds of decisions, because what's right for Chateau B is not right for Chateau A. So I understand the desire to get to the shortcut, as it were, and these are the 5 things or 2 things and the silver bullet in many circumstances. It really does depend on your voice, who you are, how you see yourself in the marketplace, what you want to accomplish, and rarely ever is it the same for everyone. So I honestly find it a little hard to answer. I'd be happy to talk to you afterwards, but the one-size-fits-all approach generally is not a recipe for success.
If I go to a market visit, my expectation is that they have inventory, that I see, depending on how many days they give you, that's starting to get shorter. Like they used to get 3 sales days and then like a general sales meeting typically. So you'd fly in on a Monday, you'd work Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and then you get a Friday meeting with the sales team. That's a great week. When I go in, I try and make that be my ideal situation. I work those 3 days with those reps. I try and have a dinner with as many of them as I can, and then try and do a general sales meeting. I make sure that they have POS, that they know the story, my PowerPoint's ready to go, that talks about my brand, and that my recap is ready at the end of it, and that they follow through on what they've sold. And then I want a report. I want a tracker at the end of it. So that's kind of, if I'm going to the market, that's what I try and expect. Try to get three work days in a sales meeting, and then your POS in process, in working, and then recap on both ends.
I would add real quick that I pretty much agree with Glenn that it's difficult to give you kind of a one response answer to that, but I do believe that goal setting and regular communication should be high on everybody's list. You know, when I started at Elk Cove 17 years ago, we were much smaller, and we probably were fit the size that most of you in this room. And I was a one-man show for them, the first person really that they hired to do such a thing. And, you know, I don't remember how many years, I didn't do that either. I didn't do goal setting. That came on down the road. And I can't tell you how that has improved the relationship overall over the years, because you know, you're communicating your desires. If you don't communicate your desires, how can you expect them to reach it?
Yeah, one little footnote, certainly sales is the ultimate reality test. If you're not paying attention to sales and what's moving and how it's moving, everything follows from that. Your own voice is layered on top of that, and it's part of that, but ultimately the bottom line is usually what you have to be watching. So those are the things, the functions of that process you have to be looking at. Sorry.
Sorry, I just had a question for, let's back up to you're getting a distributor. And if you get one, then you're deciding the mix of your products to go into that market. And I've kind of done it both ways, where I've done like, sure, I've got 7 SKUs, let's do 7 SKUs. And I've done it where, no, we're really focusing on these 2 SKUs. And I just wanted your guys' opinion on how that works, or the approach that you think is best as a new person in a market to really get some sort of pull through and focus. If you think, yes, show them everything you have and find out what sells, or no, start very focused.
I think that's an interesting point. I was recently working with a winery that has almost 60 different labels. And so that can be interesting going into certain markets. But we had core wines. We had our flagship wine. This was a wine that kind of embodied who we were and really spoke of us when you tasted it, when you saw it, the packaging. It was a wine that we considered our flagship, and then we had a handful of core wines that fit in a few different price points around it. And if you're lucky to be in that position, you can kind of say to your distributor, this is what you can get. And then if you do well with that, we can talk about other things. I think that could be a good start. If you have a lot fewer wines, then you just have to look at your inventory again. We're back to that of seeing what you can fill. That's so important, of just knowing that if you do get a wine into a market, you've done all this work, and then you run out and you don't have any more wine to sell them, then that's kind of a waste of your time and your money as far as that goes. But yeah, you should really have at least an idea of a wine that really embodies you, and make that known. Make that the wine that gets people in the door, and then they'll want to try other wines.
I completely agree with that. And I think another important piece of this is, as you keep going on to knowing who you are, and also if you've come to this place of, you've gotten a distributor, obviously through that process there's been dialogue about what their needs are. And so sometimes that's sort of self-selecting, because they've also picked you because you fill a niche or a void that they have in their portfolio. And so hopefully that dialogue is part of your process as you're talking to people about what you're doing.
I would have to say, if you don't have your core and focus wines identified before you found the distributor, then you may not even be with the right distributor. It should be part of that discussion before anyone says yes. So your expectations should be clear in terms of what those particular wines are, price points, volume, how it's going to grow over 2 or 3 years, and that should be fundamental to your selection of a distributor from the very beginning. So my hope would be that even doesn't come up because we've made an agreement based on that to begin with. That's why you're there, that's why they're with you, it's because you have that in common already.
Can I jump in? I just wanted to respond to the question over here. Maria Ponzi, I'm the Dick girl, Dick's daughter, Maria. Yeah, that was never very nice, David, that you started that, to Dick and the Dave. Okay, I wanted to just respond to, if you can't do all the things that they're doing because it is overwhelming, one thing that you can do is what Ponzi has done, and we hire a portfolio, so we're with a portfolio of wines, and they work with the distributor. So our brand is within a portfolio of 10 to 20 other wineries. It doesn't mean I get to sit around. I'm on the road too. I'm still doing a lot of what Shirley's doing, but I feel like I have this other partner in which I can work with. So when times get tough, or I don't want to spend all that money on the DA or the SPA, I have a partner to work with. Now I have to pay them. There's a commission involved, but it's just another way to look at it when you feel like you can't be everywhere and do all those wonderful things that all the rock stars up there can do. But there's an option.
Yeah, I knew that question would come. It's a lot of work, and I'm going to go back to kind of the point that I started with here was, I think, evaluating where do you want to go, because when you get that partner, as I believe it was Glenn who said, your work has just begun. The work is just beginning. So make sure it's someplace you want to go, because you will need to go. And so the work starts there, and you obviously start doing reach out to companies, friends. The Oregon Wine Board is a resource of finding who the players are in the market. And if you can get look at their portfolio, who do they have in their book? What Oregon friends are in the book? Maybe you can talk to someone there and say, might they need another brand? Are they looking for another brand? Those kinds of connections. Well, of course, that's an important. Yeah. Well, then, yeah. Yeah, you talked about how you get it, and then evaluating them is a whole nother ball game, folks, and probably a whole nother session. But yeah, the pros and cons of and David kind of touched on this, the big distributors versus the smaller guys, and one's not good and one's not bad. There's pros and cons to both sides, and where your brand fits in that is part of it. And I know we're trying to wrap up here.
I think finding the right size is the first part, and where you want to be. And then the other thing is this, and I find out where I want to go, like where I want the wines to be placed. Send those guys an email. Send an email to that buyer and be like, who do you love? Because I guarantee you're going to get there's going to be 3. I mean, we know who they are and who the darlings are in Oregon, in Portland, and just send those guys an email and just say, hey, I'm looking at this. I'm really getting into this market. We have these brands and this sort of price point. Who do you love? And they'll send something back. And then when you have you kind of have a little base, then you send an email to that distributor and go, well, so-and-so from the Ritz recommended that I get in touch with you. And their ears prick up, So that's another way to do it too. Do your homework. Yeah.
And I think knowing your strategy, your niche, and your value to the distributor, because distributors, as I mentioned in the prior session, they want to know, why should I care? Why should I care about you, your brand, your wine? Why should I bother? You need to answer that question. Your business strategy needs to answer that question. You need to have the tools to support the answer to that question first. 2, I would do exactly what she said. When you know what that is, then you know where you should be sold, where you have a potential of being sold, and talk to the customers who fit that niche and ask them who does the best job of educating, selling, presenting, following up. And then I mentioned this in the prior seminar, if you don't subscribe to 750.com, you should be, because it is a clearinghouse of information of what distributors have in their portfolios, their price points, and you can see at a glance within seconds who has what sort of Oregon wines in their portfolio. And then you think back to that strategy of who I am, where I can be sold. Are these going to be my competitors or compatriots? Do I fit here or do I not? And I think as Jessica said, there's usually 2 or 3 distributors in any market that are really viable options for your strategy and who you are, and that's usually it. So you need to go in prepared to be effective in selling them on who you are and what you want to get done.
Like Maria's model. Maria's model.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
Well, yeah, and you can do that without actually being in the portfolio. You can do that by identifying who your peer group is, who you complement, and look for those producers in other portfolios and say to the portfolio manager, I am like this brand. I offer the similar value. I am complementary. I am another option that is not competitive, but is actually additive. And that will get their attention. You got to have that reason why I should care ready. That's the first thing you say. It isn't I'm from or I do. It's here's what I can offer you. Here's how I think I can help us be successful together.